In the last several lessons, we have focused on the High Middle Ages, roughly the period between 1000 and 1300. This era marked the moment when the defining institutions of medieval Europe, the church, guilds, feudal monarchies and universities, reached their fullest and most mature form. It was also the time when the medieval worldview itself achieved its clearest and most confident expression. The ideas, values, and spiritual concerns that shaped medieval life came together most powerfully in architecture, art, literature, and philosophy. Understanding these cultural achievements helps us see how medieval people understood the world and their place within it. A defining feature of medieval culture was the overwhelmingly religious nature of its intellectual and artistic life. Unlike the ancient world or the modern one, medieval Europe produced art and literature that existed primarily for religious purposes. This was no accident. The church dominated intellectual activity and stood as the wealthiest institution in Europe, making it the principal patron of artists, architects, and writers. Universities themselves were church institutions, meaning that only clergy or men trained by the clergy had the education necessary to produce literature or philosophy. Underlying all of this was the immense influence of St. Augustine, who had taught that the ultimate purpose of all human effort was salvation. Medieval society absorbed this belief deeply. As Europe recovered after the year 1000 and once again gained the resources to build on a grand scale, the first monumental structures it constructed were churches. Architecture became one of the clearest expressions of medieval spirituality. The earliest major architectural style of the Middle Ages was Romanesque, so named because it borrowed many of its basic forms from ancient Roman engineering. Romanesque churches were characterized by round arches, thick stone walls, and relatively small windows and doors. These buildings depended on massive walls because round arches pushed their weight straight downward. The interiors were often decorated with murals and paintings, but the overall impression was heavy, solid, and fortress-like, a reflection of both engineering limitations and the need for defense in an often unstable world. Around 1100, near Paris, a revolutionary new architectural style began to emerge. Over the next 2 centuries, this Gothic style spread throughout northern Europe and transformed church construction. The key innovation was the pointed arch. Unlike the round arch, the pointed arch redirected much of the building's weight outward rather than downward. That outward pressure was absorbed by external buttresses, stone supports placed outside the church walls. As a result, the walls themselves no longer had to be thick. Architects could now fill them with large, stained glass windows. The effect was stunning. Gothic cathedrals rose upward, filled with coloured light that flooded the interior. To medieval worshippers, light symbolized divine grace, making the Gothic church feel less like a fortress and more like a vision of heaven made visible on earth. These buildings seemed almost transparent, dissolving the barrier between the material and the divine. While Gothic architecture expressed medieval spirituality in stone and glass, the greatest literary expression of medieval religious thought came from the Italian poet Dante Alighieri. His masterpiece, The Divine Comedy, stands as one of the most important works of Western literature and directly addresses the central question of medieval life: how does a human being achieve salvation? The poem follows Dante himself as he journeys through hell, purgatory, and heaven. This journey represents the spiritual path every soul must follow to reach God. Dante's guide through hell and purgatory is Virgil, the Roman poet, who symbolizes classical learning and human reason. Virgil's guidance is essential, but it is also limited. At certain points, he can guide Dante no further. When this happens, a heavenly figure named Lucy, whose name means light, intervenes. In medieval symbolism, light represents divine grace and revelation. Only through this divine light can Dante continue upward. When Dante reaches the gates of heaven, Virgil must remain behind. Classical reason alone, Dante tells us, cannot grasp divine mysteries. In paradise, Dante is guided by heavenly figures, and finally lifted through the celestial spheres to behold God himself. The Divine Comedy is not merely a story, it is a philosophical and theological argument written in poetic form. Dante teaches that salvation requires both human reason and divine revelation. Classical learning and logic are valuable and necessary, but they must be completed by faith and grace. This message reflects one of the great intellectual struggles of the High Middle Ages, reconciling faith and reason. That struggle lay at the heart of medieval philosophy, particularly a movement known as Scholasticism. Scholastic thinkers sought to use logic and careful reasoning to understand, explain, and defend Christian theology, while still respecting the authority of Scripture and church tradition. The founder of Scholasticism was St. Anselm of Canterbury, who famously summarized his method as, "I believe so that I may understand." For Anselm, faith came first, but reason could deepen understanding. Anselm's most famous contribution was his logical argument for the existence of God, now known as the ontological argument. While complex, its basic assumption touched on a deeper issue that would dominate medieval thought: the problem of universals. Universals are general concepts such as goodness, humanity, or truth. The debate centered on whether these concepts were real entities or merely names. Realists, influenced by Plato and Augustine, believed that universals existed independently of the human mind. Nominalists, by contrast, believed that universals were only labels used to describe individual things. In the early 12th century, reason took an even more prominent role in theology through the work of Peter Abelard. Teaching in Paris, Abelard applied rigorous logical analysis to Christian doctrine, even questioning long-standing interpretations. His willingness to debate and analyze unsettled many church leaders, and some of his writings were condemned. Yet his methods encouraged later scholars to push reasoning further than ever before. That effort reached its peak in the work of St. Thomas Aquinas. Writing in the 13th century, Aquinas confronted an intellectual crisis caused by the rediscovery of Aristotle's major works, newly translated from Arabic and Greek. Aristotle emphasized empirical observation and logical reasoning, challenging long-held assumptions about the sources of knowledge. Aquinas responded by developing a comprehensive theological system that integrated Aristotle with Christian doctrine. In his Summa Theologiae, he argued that truth could be known in two ways, through faith and through reason, and that these two forms of truth could never contradict one another because both came from God. Not all thinkers accepted Aquinas' confidence in reason. In the early 14th century, William of Ockham rejected the idea that reason could prove anything about God. He argued that Christian teachings must be accepted purely on faith and insisted that universals were only names, not real entities. According to Ockham, reason could explain how the world works, but not why it exists. That shift moved European thought away from grand theological systems and toward a more empirical, observation-based approach. Between 1000 and 1300, medieval Europe produced some of the most sophisticated religious, philosophical, and cultural achievements in Western history. Yet by the late Middle Ages, thinkers began questioning the assumptions that supported this worldview. In doing so, they laid the groundwork for the scientific method, Renaissance humanism, and the gradual separation of faith and reason. The High Middle Ages thus stand not only as the peak of medieval culture, but also as the threshold of the modern intellectual world.